Yeah. Oh, there we go, Delicus. You know?
Yeah. So,
No
recite
breakout room today.
so 5, please.
There we go. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Buddhang saranang gacchami.
Buddhang saranang gacchami.
Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
Tutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Tutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Panati pata viramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Adinādāna viramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Adinnādāna veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Kāmesu miccāchārā viramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Kame sumiccāchārā veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Musāvādā viramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Musāvādā veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Suramīraya majjapamā daṭṭhāna viramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Suramere majjapamadatthana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Now it's time to recite together to offer all the offerings we place in front of the Buddha statue. So let's recite the stanzas to do the puja. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Veneration to the Buddha. Itipiso bhagava arahang samma sambuddhu vidya charana sampanno sugato lokavidu anuttaro purisa dhamma sarathi sattha deva manussanang buddho bhagavati. Veneration to the Dhamma. Swakhato bhagavata dhammo sandittiko akaliko ehi passiko opanayiko pachattang vedi tambu vinyohiti. Veneration to the Sangha. Supatipanno bhagavato savaka sanghu ujupatipanno bhagavato savaka sanghu nyayapatipanno bhagavato savaka sanghu samicipatipanno bhagavato savaka sanghu yadidang chattari purisa yugani atta purisa pungala esa bhagavato savaka sanghu Ahuneyo Pahuneyo Dakhineyo Anjali Karaniyo Anuttarang Punyakhetang Lokasati. Offering candles. Ganasarappadintena Deepena Tamadansina Tilokadipang Sambuddhang Pujayami Tamonudang. Offering incense. Gandha Sambharayuntena Dupena Hang Sugandhina Pujaye Pujaniyantang Puja Bhajana Muttamang. Offering flowers. वन्यगन्धे गुणोपेतं एतं कुसुमसन्ततिं पूजयामि मुनिन्दस्य श्रीपादसरोरुहे पूजेमि बुद्धं कुसुमेन नेन पुण्येन मे तेन च होतु मोक्षं पुप्पं मिलायाति यथा इदं मे कायो तथा याति विनाशभावम् offering medicinal drinks including water. Adivase tuno bhante paniyang parikapitang anukhang pang upadaya patiganhatu muttamang Adivase tuno bhante gilana pachayang imang anukhang pang upadaya patiganhatu muttamang Adivase tuno bhante besajjang parikapitang Anukhang pang upadaya patiganhatu muttamang. Veneration of all the pagodas of Buddha's relics and the Bodhi tree. Vandami chetiyang sabbang sabbathani supatittitang saririka dhatu mahabodhim buddharupang sakalang sada yasya mule nisinnova sabbari vijayang akha Patto sabbanyutang satta vanditang bodhipadapang. Apologizing from the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Kaina vacha chittena pamadina maya katang achayang kamami bhante bhuri panya tathagata. Kaina vacha chittena pamadina maya katang achayang kamami dhamma sandittika akalika කායේන වාචා චිත්තේන පමාදේන මයා කතං අච්චයං කමමි සංඝ සුපටිපන්න අනුත්තර aspiration ඉමිනා පුඤ්ඤ කම්මේන මාමේ බාල සමාගමෝ සතන් සමාගමෝ හෝතු යාව නිබ්බාන පන්තියා සාදු okay. Let's move the meditation. Skip to your postures. Keep your back head and neck straight. Put your right palm on the left palm and close your eyes. Meditation on loving kindness. May I be well, happy, and peaceful. May no harm come to me. May no difficulties come to me. May no problems come to me. May I always meet with success. May I also have patience, courage, understanding, and determination to meet and overcome inevitable difficulties, problems, and failures in life. May my parents, family members, teachers, relatives, friends, enemies, all living beings be well, happy, and peaceful. May no harm come to them. May no difficulties come to them. May no problems come to them. May they always meet with success. May they also have patience, courage, understanding, and determination to meet and overcome inevitable difficulties, problems, and failures in life. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Idammi nyati nang hotu sukita huntu nyatayo. Idammi nyati nang hotu sukita huntu nyatayo. Idammi nyati nang hotu sukita huntu nyatayo. Ittavata cha ammihi sambatang punya sampadang. Sabbe deva anumodantu, sabbe bhuta anumodantu, sabbe satta anumodantu, sabba sampatti siddhya, aka sattha cha bummattha deva naga mahintika, punyantang anumoditva, chirang rakkang tuluka sasanang, chirang rakkang tudesanang, chirang rakkang tumang paranti. Now it's a time for you to respect the monks. Ovini?
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Silavantam, gunavantam, punyakhitam, anuttaran. Tullavena mayaladdam, buddha puttan namamaham. Silavantam, gunavantam, punyakhitam, anuttaran. Tullavena mayaladdam, buddha puttan namamaham. Silavantam, gunavantam, punyakhitam, anuttaran. Tullavena mayaladdam, buddha puttan namamaham.
Now we turn to the veneration of parents. So please approach your parents. First, we're going to venerate mother. Dase mase ure katva pose se buddhi karanang ayudigang vassa satang matupadang namamahang. Dasamasayak දුක් විඳමා හැදු අම්මේ ලේ කෙරි කරපුවාමා දැඩි කළ අම්මේ නිවසේ බුදුන් යැයි බුදුහිමි දෙසූ අම්මේ ඔබ පායුග වඳිමි මා ආදර අම්මේ. Father, බුද්ධිකාරු අලිංගිත්වා චුම්බිත්වා පිය පුත්තකං රාජ මච්ඡං සුපතින්ඨං පීතු පාදං නමාමහං. නැති බැරි කමක් මට නොදැනෙන න්‍යායෙනි දුක් කරදර මැදින් මා හැදු දයාවෙනි හොඳ දරුවෙකු වෙන්න මට දුන් ඔවාමිනි ඔබ පායුග වඳිමි මා ආදර පියාණෙනි. You can come back to your seat. I'm going to bless all of you. Abhivadana silissa nichang vaddha pachayino chattaro dhamma vaddanti ayuvanno sukhang balang ayurarogya sampatti sagga sampatti mevacha ato nibbana sampatti iminate samijjatu. Next is singing the Dhamma school song. Please rise and then gonna Yeah. So, Mike, did we discuss about deadline for the presentations
Yes, I think we came up with
at the
one.
end? Uh-huh.
Yeah. Be darned if I can remember what it was though. I think we decided that it was to be
April?
yeah, the April oh, I have the schedule. I think I did actually write it down. Yeah, April 25th. That was yeah, students hand in creative projects, April 25th. Yeah. That's what I have on my schedule. That I think the idea was that that's when everybody's finished spring break, right? So you should have some time then that gives you the maximum possible chance to work through it without you have a chance to when you don't have any school, so you can maybe get some of it done then, or you can get it done early, whatever you want. But that would be the date for handing it in. And then in terms of how we're going to incorporate that into the curriculum, I think Bhante, we can talk about that later.
Yeah, later. Okay, yeah, please.
Also,
Okay.
also for the Dhampasal Gita and the Chatamano Gata, I'm probably gonna send it this week. Just I have to practice one more time, and then I'm gonna send it this.
Did you record certain?
No, we're gonna record it this week.
Okay, great. What is a good way? I think you have a YouTube channel. Probably we can upload to Temple channel. I don't know. I mean, what would you like?
I'm not sure. I think anything's fine.
You're fine with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So do you record it like with a music in the background, or just record it?
I'm not sure. I'll have to ask my mom about that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Okay. Well, in that case, shall we get started on today's topic? In the chat. So today, we're finally getting to the, we've been through the weird and the wacky. And today we get the textbook in case we've lost the link. And today we're starting on page 407. 407. And we're going to begin discussions of Devas. So this forms the last portion of the curriculum, although technically we do move from Devas to Brahma beings, which are arguably their own category. But sometimes they're also classified in as an extension of the Deva realm. And so we get to finally talk about all the nice stuff, mostly. Having been literally been through hell and back. And we've seen all the miscellaneous strange weird creatures. There are a few in there that we didn't actually discuss in class, but you're free to read about them in your own time if you're curious. Like Kinnaras are in there. They're kind of interesting. They figure a lot in like Thai mythology, especially, and iconography and things. You'll see them on temples and stuff. And there's a lot of other interesting curiosities in that section of the textbook that we just didn't get to cover. But we're going to pass over them so that we can cover this major section in time by the end of the year. So Devas on page 407. Dilika, why don't you read the first paragraph?
Yeah, sorry, Mike. It's just loading. The website's taking a little bit long to load.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
Like 2 more seconds.
Yeah, no rush.
I don't know if it's something with my Wi-Fi or
Could be. Could be. Yeah, page 407.
Perfect. The Devas. Okay. Above the human world in the cosmic hierarchy are the various levels of Devas. The Devas are beings of the Kamakumbhi, considered to have a fortunate rebirth, longer lives, and more pleasure than human beings. They surpass humans in 5 qualities in particular: lifespan, beauty, happiness, fame. The implications is that they have a large retinues. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, yeah, retinue. Yeah, it's a group of people who follows you around and keeps you company.
And power. Devas are anthropomorphic. I cannot read today.
Anthropomorphic. So anthrop is man or human, and then morphos is form in Greek. So anthropomorphic means having the form of a man or human.
In appearance and are always very beautiful. As being of the Kamakumbhi, like human beings and animals, they are gendered and enjoy sexual relations. Likewise, they consume solid food, although their food, called pseudogene, is much subtle than ours. Their bodies are more refined than ours and free of all gross impurities. We have no clear indication as to physical size of the Bhuma Devas, although it seems they were at most of human stature. The Devas of the sagas, on the other hand, are often described as having Tiga Bhutta bodies, which would make them 8 kilometers tall. Nevertheless, should they choose to do so, up to 60 Devas can stand together on the point of an owl and not feel crowded.
Okay, great. This is an excellent section. There's a lot going on here. First of all, they're endowed with 5 qualities that should be pretty familiar from the regular blessing. Is a very commonly cited blessing in the Pali, from the kind of Pali prayer book, so to speak. They surpass humans in these qualities: Ayu, Vanno, and then Sukha, and then we're missing one, and that would normally be in there, and it's Balang. That's normally a blessing that's given to people who request it. It's like Bhante at the beginning of every session gives us this blessing that we will have these 4 qualities: Ayu, Vanno, Sukham, Balang. So the Devas have these qualities plus more. Usually already, it's just by default, it comes with being a Deva. They are part of the Kama Bhumi. That's the sense desire realm. I think I discussed this last time, that they all have gender, like they all have a sexual identity because they're part of the sense desire realm. There are only the Brahmas do not fall into this category. They're not part of the Kama Bhumi. So Devas are like us in this respect. And they are, but they're sort of, their physical identity is more fluid than ours. So they can change shape, they can change size and all these things. And there's an interesting, this point at the end about Deva standing on the head of an owl is really funny, because in medieval Christianity, there were lots of debates in Europe about how many angels could stand on the head of a pin, which is a very similar question, obviously. It's just the sewing implement is different. But the it's often held up as an example of, I guess, medieval navel gazing. people were wasting their time thinking about silly questions that don't really matter much. And it appears, it's funny because the exact same question is answered right explicitly in the early canon itself in Buddhism. So we have how many angels can stand on the head of a pin? Well, it's in there. it's in the book. So there's no debate about it, I suppose. But it's not an important point. More interestingly, that there are different kinds of devas, and we're going to get into this more. We have the Bhumma Devas and the Sagga Devas. So Sagga is Sanskrit is Swarga, which means heaven or the good. It literally means the good place. And Bhumma is from Bhumi, which is the earth, right? So the earthbound deities are best thought of as being like sprites or fairies, is probably the closest analog in like Western mythology. They live in woods and hills and hillocks, or being like elves maybe in like Norse mythology, if that, or maybe nymphs in Greek mythology, if you're familiar with any of those things. That's kind of what the Bhumma Devas are like. So their typical residence is actually here among us. So they're just not visible to non-deva beings. Although they are capable of making themselves so. In this respect, they're similar to yakas, which we saw earlier. And there are some good stories, ancient and modern mythological tales about Bhumma Devas appearing to people. I think if you read the biography of Ajahn Mun, who is a Thai forest monk, there is at least one famous story about his interaction with a Bhumma Deva. Believe it or not, up to you, but these stories do exist, and he's a modern figure. He was born about 100 years ago, so it's not ancient history. Okay. Ovindu, why don't you read the next paragraph?
Sure. Devas are normally invisible to human beings because our visual consciousness is not refined enough to perceive them. In the same way, Brahmas, who are beings of Rupa Bhumi, are normally invisible to Devas. In both cases, the higher level being may be perceived by the lower as a brilliant light. In one sutta, the Buddha recounts how before his full awakening, his knowledge of Devas grew in stages. First, he perceived only a light, then he became aware of forms, then he was able to converse with them, and finally acquired various knowledges about them, such as to which class of Deva they belonged to, and whether he had ever lived among them.
Yeah, that's very good. That passage that's being referred to there, he discussed. He's talking about the night of his awakening when he was practicing meditation, and how he knew that his meditation was going in the wrong direction. Because if he would, apply his mind in a certain way, the lights that indicated there was a deva there would vanish, or they would dim, or he would stop seeing them. So he would know, oh, I got to point my mind in the way that these forms and lights start appearing to me. That's probably the right direction. So that it was one of the indications that he used the hints to guide him in the right along the right path. Even though seeing devas is in and of itself isn't really an indication of any kind of spiritual maturity, but it was one indicator that the Bodhisattva used when he was practicing in his final push to achieve awakening. Ovini, want to read the next one?
Sure. Okay, sorry. The mode of birth for devas is Upapatika Yoni, spontaneous rebirth. The deva simply appears fully grown, perhaps already equipped by a palace, and a retinue if its merit is sufficient. There sometimes exists a kind of parent-child relationship among devas, and young ones are called devaputta and devadutta. In case they are said to appear upon the lap of their parent, usually their father. Although the lifespan of Devas is very long, reaching 2.3 billion years and highest of the sagas, they are mortal like all other beings in the Buddhist cosmos. However, from them, death is painless as rebirth. As birth. There is no prolonged death agony. A few days before his passing, the Deva observes in himself the 5 signs. The garments become soiled, his garlands fade, his armpits grow sweaty, his body loses its glowing complexion, and he becomes restless on his seat. At the end, he simply disappears from the place.
Very good. Okay, yeah. So they basically have a very subtle death when they do die. And it's kind of gross, but it's not necessarily as bad as ours. Like human death is pretty gruesome. And this tends to follow a pattern among all the strata of samsara. When like an animal dies, it's usually more gruesome than when a human dies. When an animal dies, usually they're killed by some other creature, so it's usually violent. And their carcass lies out in the wilderness and is picked apart by other animals. They are often also sometimes devoured as they die, so they have this horrible agonizing death, being eaten alive. That's extremely common for animals. Or they are killed by a rival or something like that, usually violent, or they have some horrible disease. Humans often die of old age with our faculties slowly decaying. So we suffer pain, but it's usually a kind of chronic low-level pain. That's usually how humans go. And then at one point, some organ will fail, and then we'll just conk out. So that's not so bad in comparison with animals, but the devas have an even lighter experience. They just get a little gross and sweaty, and their complexion gets a little nastier, and then they just disappear, and they instantly reappear somewhere else as whatever their merit is determined that they become.
Mike, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
They refer to the deva as his. So and like, does that mean is there like a female version?
Yeah. So devas can be male or female. I think actually, let me see. I'm looking at the author's use of pronouns here. I see its merit is sufficient. Other means that death for them. Yeah, he's just kind of the author is kind of passing in and out of. Oh, I know why. The reason why he's used his here in this particular sentence is because it's a quote from the original text, which is used his. But that's what's in the canon. Probably because Pali is a sexist language, like Spanish, and it just assumes the default pronoun is him. But devas can be male and female, and the same rules apply to both. The devas also pair by sex, like humans do, as well. And I don't know of any sexual hierarchy among the devas. I don't think there's. I'm not aware of any kind of form of sexual inequality among them. I don't know if it's discussed. But yeah, presumably one would think that devas that they're all different, and so there's probably not a. I think they're usually I think the devas are often ruled by a king, by Sakka, who's the king of at least one of the heavens. So that's a male. I've not heard of any like kind of queen of the devas, like a female ruling figure. And once you pass beyond the devas into like the brahmas, which are kind of a subcategory, there's no gender anymore, so it becomes an irrelevant discussion. But that said, there are differences in Buddhist mythological structures and like in different traditions. So in somewhat like in the Tibetan tradition, all these things that we've said so far of devas are true, but there is more discussion of the female ones, and like notable named female devas are more common in the mythology. And there's also one thing that we will probably come across is that devas, when they achieve enlightenment in the Theravadan tradition, as we said, they can do this, just like yakas can do this to a certain extent, humans can do it. But when in the Theravadan mythology, when a deva achieves nibbana on that rare occasion, they disappear like when they die. They just go poof. But in the Tibetan tradition, they can continue to exist. Like they can continue to experience and interact with beings, and they can benefit other beings. So, as an example of a difference in the tradition, which has some significant implications. So, if you don't see the veneration of enlightened devas really so much in Theravada, but you will see it in like Chinese or especially Tibetan mythology because they have a large canon of devas who are enlightened. They say that this deva achieved enlightenment, so he's still there, still living in this heaven, and if you you can commune with him and he can still help you or her. And they still have these deva characteristics, but this one is an enlightened deva, and they separate them into the devas into categories of devas who are awakened and free, and devas who are not, just regular devas, just like there are awakened humans and non-awakened humans, which I think is very interesting. I think it's a little more sophisticated maybe, or it's just different. So that's a perspective, but that we won't get into that because this is based in mostly Theravada mythology. Okay, little about the. I'm going to skip over the etymology. Deva is like cognate with all the other words for God in various Indo-European languages. That's where the word comes from. It's just like we've always had this word for God. We have the word divinity, divine, deva, devil. They're all coming from this original same root word in Indo-European lore. The human realm on page 409. Yeah, the human realm is usually considered to be the ideal state for realization of the Dhamma because of the balance of pleasure and pain. When the Buddha teaches Dhamma to the Devas, they mostly become afraid and cry out, "We thought we were everlasting, not subject to change," but it is not so. Their long lives of constant pleasure lull them into heedlessness. So this is an important thing to bear in mind about, if you have good fortune, you're more likely to ignore the pressing concern in the long term. So that's this is something that humans fall prey to as well, but devas are more likely to. Okay, Devika, why don't you read the next paragraph there on page 409?
Nevertheless, it is possible for some devas to hear the Dhamma and to attain to the fruits of the path. This is said to be a good reason to memorize passages of Dhamma while still in human form, so that one may recall them easily if reborn as a deva. Devas may recall the Dhamma in 4 ways. More fortunate devas may recite passages to them. Some earthly bhikkhus with psychic powers may preach to them. Some devas are advanced enough to teach on their own account, and some may recover old memories by speaking with other devas who were previously bhikkhus. There are many instances of devas attaining a stream entry recounted in the canon. It is specifically stated that there is a Sotabana devas to be found in each of the sagas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's not that uncommon for devas to be Aryas, to be at least some level of awakened. They don't disappear when they achieve Sotapatti, because that is you still have some existences to experience. So it's fairly common. It was also said in the Buddha's own time, it was a complaint that there were a lot of Sotapannas running around. The Buddha would often certify so and so, yes, he has achieved Sotapatti. Oh, she's achieved Sotapatti. They're on their way there. They've got a taste of the right direction. And then at one point, some monks even complained about this, saying like, well, that can't possibly be the case. There's so many of them. You keep saying about almost like all kinds of people. How can it be so common? And the Buddha said, well, it's really not that uncommon. That was his answer. It's not that difficult. So we see the heavens are populated with devas who are Sotapannas. And this kind of makes sense that they would cluster up there because Sotapannas can't be born below humans. So they're more likely to be found among humans and devas. Okay, and Ovindu, why don't you read the next paragraph in translations?
Sure. In translations, the devas are sometimes referred to as gods. This is a natural enough association, and there is probably a deep historical link between the devas of Talatisma and the pantheons of Greek and Norse mythology via the Aryan expansion of the 2nd millennium BC. Nevertheless, the Devas of Buddhist India differ from the gods of the West in at least two important respects. First, as mentioned above, they are mortal beings subject to birth and death. A human being may be reborn as a Deva. When a Deva dies, he may be reborn human or even into the lower realms. Indeed, this is the case more often than not. Second, the Devas are in no way the creators of the world, nor are they the governors in any but the most remote and notional sense. To these two important considerations, we might also add that the Devas are in general much better behaved than the gods. In contrast to the well-known escapades of Zeus, when Saka impregnated a human woman to fulfill her wish for sons, he did so by gently touching her navel with his thumb.
Yeah. So devas are, as he says, better better behaved. You guys have probably all learned about, like, say, Greek and Norse mythology and all these various things at school, yeah? No, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so some of you, but yeah, it was definitely a topic I studied when I was in elementary and high school, I think. But yeah, we see, especially in Norse mythology, but also in Greek mythology, there's no association, there's no expectation that the gods will be morally well behaved. The gods were venerated in Western cultures because they were stronger than us. It was really straightforward. You respect them because they can kick your butt, and that's it. Or they can give you good stuff, or they can take it away and they can ruin you. There was no moral dimension to that. Uh, that changed with the advent of, like, Christianity and so forth in the West. There was an expectation that divine figures and God would be more morally upright than humans. Uh, but that was a novel thing. That was an innovation that Christianity brought. But in Buddhist India, but also in other Indian religions like Jainism and Hinduism, there was the expectation that the gods would be well behaved, and that's how they got there. And it's a consequence of the philosophical idea of karma. If you understand that good behavior gets you a higher position in the cosmic hierarchy, then obviously the people at the top will be well behaved. Uh, and so that's what it ultimately boils down to. Is it's this unique idea in Indian mythology of your actions determining your rebirth, and that's why they behave so differently from Western gods. Sometimes people call them, yeah. So sometimes people will refer to them as gods. I often do in English. I will cut in and out of this, I admit, but I think it's important to. I think I use this term. I use the term gods when I'm talking to people who are not Buddhist or who don't have an extensive vocabulary that goes with Buddhism. But and if I'm talking in Buddhist circles, I'll use the term deva because everyone knows what it means. But there is, people just don't know what a deva is. If they're not a Buddhist or a Hindu, so they're not going to be familiar with the term. I think a god is a good enough description of what they are. You might also be able to get away with calling them angels in English. I think it's a pretty close parallel. They have a pretty close parallel to angels in say Christian or like Islamic mythology, because they're not creator beings, they're not omnipotent, but they have a nicer existence, a kind of life than we do, and are often or sometimes wiser than us, and they're better behaved than us. So in that respect, they're actually kind of more closely analogous to angels than they are to gods. So that's another way you could explain it or think about it if you're trying to draw parallels. What we need, you want to read the last paragraph?
Sure. Rebirth into the Deva realms is accomplished principally by acts of generosity, particularly when the giver makes an aspiration towards such rebirth. However, the truly wise spiritual seeker does not desire any kind of rebirth, no matter how pleasant. Existence as a deva is seen by awakened as a sensual bondage.
Yeah, bondage is being trapped, tied up, bound down. So yeah, being reborn as a deva is a kind of trap, just like any birth. So there's nothing, in that sense, there's nothing particularly special about it. except that it just kind of gives you relief from the pain of the lower realms and the suffering therein for a while. It could be a long while. It could be billions of years. But that is an important thing to keep in mind, because ultimately Buddhism is not about being reborn as a deva. It's not about going to heaven. It is about getting free. And what that means experientially is outside of the scope of this course, but you can find out for yourselves if you practice hard. Okay, very good. So that covers, I don't want to go into the next lesson too much, since we are done with a little bit of time to spare. There are only a few of us here today, so we kind of went through it. I'm going to leave, yeah, because the next thing we are supposed to cover is the devas, the earth and sky, but I'm going to leave that for next time because I don't want to get ahead without everybody else here. So whoopsie, I will instead, I guess we could take a break a little bit early. We'll come back at 3 o'clock, and then we'll do a meditation, and we'll have our discussion, unless there's anything pressing that you really want to bring up right now.
Sounds good to me, Mike.
Okay, all right. See you back here in 12 minutes. Okay, everybody, let me know when you're back. We'll do a little meditation.
I might come here.
Hey.
We're back.
Great. Okay, so we'll do meditation for about 10 minutes. Meditate however you like, whatever theme. I think Ajahn Chah used to say, whatever theme the mind inclines to. So you can just meditate whatever way you like, as long as you carry the important qualities into that practice. Now you can make a wish or dedicate your merit, your practice, to whatever your aspiration might be. If it's just get me through this school year, that's good. If you wish that your parents will be happy or your friends, or that you may have success, those are good too. A higher rebirth, that's a good one. Or complete awakening, that's the highest aspiration. But whatever you feel equipped and ready to aspire to, make that the aim of your practice. Okay, so we got about half an hour-ish, a little more than that, that we can just chat and get caught up. We can talk about whatever's going on for you guys. if you have questions or comments about your own practice, what we've talked about in class, or just Buddhism general Q&A, or thoughts, things you want to share, or things you learned, let's open it up. I think there was one thing that stood out to me today, and that was thinking about the size of the devas. It reminded me of something I heard, some advice I heard a while ago, a visualization, and someone told me that when you're doing visualization practice, in like the Tibetan tradition, they like to visualize Buddhas and things. That's like their main form of meditation. You make a mental image of a Buddha and hold it in your mind. And when they do it, they said if you're feeling very flighty and energized and your mind is scattered, imagine the image, imagine the Buddha or the enlightened being as being huge, as being like 8 kilometers tall, and like pigeons are flying in and out of its nostrils, or like wild animals, deer are frolicking on its feet and stuff. And I thought that reminded me of of what we were reading today about the devas, because of course many of those figures might be visualizing could be devas, and so I thought that was kind of appropriate. It made me chuckle to think, oh yeah, that's the size they're supposed to be. At least according to this. Yeah, so I don't know, I thought that was kind of interesting.
I also have a question. So is 2.3 billion years the minimum of how long devas last, or the maximum?
That's the max. It's the upper limit.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So I think at the lower end you have thousands of years, on the order of thousands, and then at the upper end you have billions. I think some of the Brahma deities, which are kind of like devas, I think some of them have lifespans that can go longer than that even. That's when you get beyond the kama bhumi, the sense desire realm. When you go beyond that, I think some of the beings can be even more long lived than that.
Thank you. Also, I remember we already talked about this. Like, if you're a really good person and you did like one little bad thing, then you would probably go to like Apaya for like 1 second and then come back. But can it be like the opposite? Like you go to heaven and then you stay there, and then after that you go to Apaya for a bit and then you come back?
Yep, definitely possible. We have instances of all of those kind of cases in the canon. I think there was one of I think it was King Bimbisara's queen, and she did some, like, she was generally good, but she did like 1 or 2 really terrible things, and so she spent after her death, her immediate destination was, I believe, Niraya. And so when asked about her destination, the Buddha just didn't say anything for about 7 days, because he didn't want to scare people. Because after, I think it was about a week or something like that, and then after that she burned off that negative karma and reappeared in one of the Deva worlds, and then he told him, oh yeah, that's where she is now. So obviously a Buddha can't lie. He's not morally bound not to lie. He is incapable of lying. So the most tactful thing he could do is not answer. So he just kind of waited until a better time to tell the destination. So that's possible for sure. It's also not necessarily that, like, if you do, it's not necessarily the case that you will go to a lower realm for a misdeed. So it's not like if you are generally a good person, you're adhering to good moral like rules, and you're maintaining upright and noble conduct, and then you make a few mistakes, and you, like, I don't know, you steal something as a kid and you're like, oh shoot, I regret that, or you lie to somebody and you're like, no wait, that was a bad decision. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to the lower realms. It doesn't necessarily mean that you'll go to like a heavenly realm and then snap down and snap back. It could just be that you'll have to work that out as a specific instance. Usually your destination, like which plane or realm you're ending up in, it seems to be determined more by your habits, like habitual actions, than by specific ones. Your particular experiences in those realms may be more determined by specific behaviors that like specific events and decisions you made. So like if you made a few mistakes in your life, but you've generally been, adhering to the rules and you've been behaving with compassion and benevolence, you're probably going to go to a good destination, right? So that's one thing I want to clarify. So it's like, I don't want you guys to be going away believing that this is literally true and that you should be afraid that like any mistake you make, you'll end up in like as a ghost for a while or something. That's not necessarily the case. According to the tradition, you will be like your predominant trait, your predominant characteristics will carry you. And the one time where it really does matter what your specific behaviors are like the last moments of your life. Those are very important because it reveals your deeper character. So that can actually propel you one way or another. But usually specific destinations are not determined by a particular action you take. So if you nick a chocolate bar from the store, you're probably not going to hell for that. That's not how it typically works. But if you're making that a habit and you are a thief, then that could be bad in the long term. But like a specific instance of behavior does not determine your character, your essence, because that doesn't exist. So I just wanted to really make that clear, so you guys aren't like, I don't want you guys to be afraid or anything. That's not what this is about. Plus, I'm not even telling you guys you have to believe any of this is literally true. Anyway, I wanted to see if I believe this should be covered in the Brahmas. Yeah, okay. Planet form, lifespan. I think it's probably covered in here. No, maybe not. Yeah, I don't think there's a. Oh, here we go. Yes. Yeah. So beings in the Brahma world have much longer lifespans than the Devas, than regular Devas. On page 612 of the textbook. Yeah, we have they're measured in a completely different. They're not even measured in years anymore. They don't measure them that way in the commentarial tradition and in the actual canon. They don't use years anymore when you get beyond the Deva world and out of the Sensasai realm. The lifespans of the beings from this level and beyond are measured in kappas, or in like aeons or ages of the universe. It should be pointed out that for first jhana level Brahmas, a kappa is not referred to as not a full kappa, but an intermediate kappa, or roughly a fourth of a full one. So that they can. So if you cultivate meditation, so the key distinction between the regular Devas and the Brahmas is the practice of meditation. So like to become a regular Deva, there's no requirement that you practice meditation. It probably helps, but if you really master meditation, it's more likely that you're going to proceed to the Brahma worlds and live for like aeons and aeons. That's me circling back to your first question.
So like I actually have another question. So there's a Sri Lankan tale about a king named King Dhamma, and so in war he like killed many people because it's war, and they won and everything, and they say that they went to heaven, but how would this be possible?
So yeah, I think I know this story. If I'm not mistaken, that he consulted a learned monk about his destination, right? And he was like, "What? How can I this might be a different king in a different war, but this is the most, I can't remember the name of the king, but he was, he had killed many people in a war. They were like Tamils from the mainland who had invading Sri Lanka or something, and he killed a bunch of them in a war. And he asked, "What's to become of me that I've killed so many people?" And the learned monk said, "Well, they don't really count because there were only like they weren't Buddhist, and only like 2 of them were Buddhist, but they weren't even keeping the precepts. So you know, it's minor." That's not legitimate. First of all, it's not canonical, right? Like it's not in the canon, so it's just some guy's opinion. It's not necessarily a foundational Buddhist text. Uh, Second of all, there is no basis in any of Buddhist philosophy or the Buddhist teachings to indicate that Buddhists or non-Buddhists are treated are of different moral value. It's irrelevant who is the recipient of your action as long as it's a sentient being. Because I mean, animals count too, right? So like you were not supposed to kill animals, but animals aren't Buddhists. Like they don't understand enough to have a religious view, let alone pick Buddhism from among them. So we have a moral responsibility to animals that is essentially the same as to humans. So why would it be any different for someone who is like a different religion or race? So it doesn't, the argument doesn't hold up. But let's say it is true. Let's say that this king's destination was heaven. How do we explain that? It is explicable because the effects of your actions do not necessarily manifest right away. So this king could hypothetically go to one of the higher realms because of something he had done way in the past and not because of his deeds as a king. Or maybe he was very generous as a king, so he is experiencing the positive result now, but the negative consequences of his evil deeds will come later. And so it's not very clear when and how the consequences of our actions will manifest. They kind of sneak up on us and get us by surprise, which is why samsara is so scary. I think from the Buddhist perspective, we don't know, we can't predict it very well. And that's why the Buddha said that speculating about how exactly the intricacies of Dhamma work is very dangerous. It can drive us mad because it's so insanely complicated, so chaotic that it's not comprehensible. And because of that, it's not safe to stay because we can't know what'll happen next. And we'll never know when our actions are going to catch up with us. So even if you do good deeds in this life, and even if you behave as well as you possibly can, you could experience a negative rebirth, like a really unfortunate one, but not because of what you did in this life, and vice versa. So we could say that, like hypothetically, say somebody is a powerful person and they do all kinds of evil deeds, and then they go to a higher realm on their rebirth. How is that fair? Well, it's not fair now. it's not fair, and it's not about justice. It's just the way that the world works. It is kind of sometimes.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's it's a tough story. I think that's the same one that you're talking about, right? The one of the king who fought all the Tamils. Yeah, I think that's a very unfortunate story, and that kind of thing gets used to justify violent action all the time. But there's no basis for it in the Buddhist teachings. It's just it's a nationalist myth, and I think this is a challenge about being a layperson in general. Like this could have been the king's responsibility, to protect against an invasion. That's his job. So I don't think we can blame him too much for that, but we try and avoid that whenever possible. And we can't escape the moral repercussions of that. If your job is to kill somebody and you do your job, you are doing an evil deed. There is no way around that. It's unfortunate. Some religions let people get away with stuff like that, but Buddhism's pretty hard.
I also have a question. This might be like a bad question, and I should probably know about it. But so there's a Jataka story where the Buddha, there's a very hungry lion. I meant Bodhisattva, and then the Bodhisattva says you can eat me, and so the lion eats the Bodhisattva. But in Buddhism, would that kind of be like suicide? Because if you're not like killing yourself, like I know the Bodhisattva thought of it as like something good and like giving the life, but isn't it always like think about yourself first, or like, yeah?
That's really that's a really good question. And yeah, taking one's own life is considered a violation of the first precept. It is violating that. So given that, how can we justify the Bodhisattva's actions in that Jataka story? Now, the actually, oh, it was a tiger, I think. The Bodhisattva in that story actually eviscerates himself, if I remember correctly. So I think, if we look at it one way, if you encourage someone else to kill you, that's arguably a violation of the precept, because if you encourage someone to take a life, that is, or exhort them to it, that counts as breaking it. It's just like having someone steal for you. It doesn't really, you don't get away with it, right? But I don't think the tiger actually kills the Bodhisattva. I think in the story, the Bodhisattva eviscerates himself by disemboweling himself and lets the tiger devour him. So he's killed himself. He has died by his own hand, which in that case is still a violation of the precept. So no matter how you look at it, I think he has broken the rule. An important thing to remember, there's a couple important things. One is that the Jataka stories are essentially mostly folk tales that have had Buddhism glued into them, I think. And so they can be good moral lessons for us, but we should also take them with a pinch of salt. The only parts of the Jataka stories that are definitely like really old, like part of the canon, are the actual verses. So each Jataka story comes with a little snippet of poetry. Those are really old. The rest of the story that those are stuck into, a lot of those are just folk tales. And if there are any that date back to the time of the Buddha, we don't know which ones they are. So it's good to be a little skeptical about the contents of those stories and the specifics of them. The moral message is kind of good, I guess, is that you should like sacrifice yourself for others, no matter how painful it may be. I think that is completely in line with the Buddhist teachings. The specific example is maybe problematic from the perspective of keeping the exact rules. Another thing to bear in mind is the Bodhisattva isn't perfect. That's the point, right? The Bodhisattva is figuring it out the whole time. And I think that's an interesting way to view the Jataka stories, is that the Bodhisattva is like us now. From the actual meaning, the etymology of the word Bodhisattva, we're all Bodhisattvas, like all of us here. It means one who is bound for awakening, one who is headed towards. Satta is from Sanskrit sakta, which means like bound to or pulled by or like latched onto. So someone who's like going toward awakening is the meaning of that word. So it's like, well, we're all practicing to get there. So we're all arguably bodhisattvas, right? And this is our condition right now. We know we're not perfect and we're making mistakes. So the bodhisattva is not, I think we should avoid viewing him as totally perfect in the Jataka stories. And he might make mistakes too. And I think that's an example of some place where, let's say that this is for the sake of argument, that this is a real story and it's not just a folktale. Let's say that this really happened. I think we can view it in that case as a story of someone who has got their heart in the right place. And they have broken a rule, but their intention was noble, certainly. And so it's probably that noble intention probably dramatically outweighs the consequences, the negative consequences of that violating of the rule in that particular instance. So I think it would be, there is definitely a mixed karma going on in that story. And there was another point I wanted to make about that. If it comes back to me, I will bring it up. Yeah. So the bodhisattva is liable to make mistakes, but in this particular story, if it's really true, then it's we could say that it's because he's making mistakes, but his heart's going in the right direction. I think that's one way to view.
So basically, So basically, like there's negative and positive, but there's mostly like good. So it's kind of like better. But if the bodhisattva was like kind of thinking, okay, you crazy lion, you can take my life, but of course the bodhisattva would never think that. If the bodhisattva thought that, then it would be like kind of a bad thing. But because the bodhisattva thought of like it as a good thing, like kind of giving a dana, then yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
okay, thank you.
it's like maybe if he's viewing his own body as dana for like the world, then that's that's a different perspective. So the perspective you take to something is almost as important, if not more so, than the specific action. Yes, that was the other thing I was going to mention. There is one case in like the canon itself, like right in the oldest stratum of text that we have in the Buddhist tradition, where one of the Buddha's disciples takes his own life and achieves liberation in spite of that. I will try and remember the name of the disciple, but in his case, he's very old and sick, and his sickness is interfering with his practice. Like he has chronic pain or something, and he just can't stand it, and he's not able to concentrate on his practice because of his pain. And in frustration, he takes his own life. He cuts his own throat with a knife, which is pretty gruesome. But when people asked about his destination, the Buddha said that he was totally free. And that didn't make any sense to them, right? They're like, well, he can't be taking his own life and be an arhat because that doesn't make sense, right? Like you can't be violating the precepts. And so the Buddha explained that it wasn't that he was an arhat before he took his life, but he did this action. He damaged his body, he destroyed his body. But in his last moments, his mind was incredibly focused on this agonizing pain of dying in such a horrible way. And in analyzing and meditating on that pain and contemplating that pain, he recognized the nature of experience and became free. So his final action was actually to break a rule, but his mind then penetrated through that experience and realized the unconditioned. So it can be the case that people make mistakes and still gain wisdom in spite of them. I think that's an important thing to remember. So that it's a very odd case. I don't think that when the Buddha said that he was an arhat, that he's approving of that specific action, but I think that in spite of that action, in spite of that mistake, the disciple still achieved awakening. And I think we could say maybe it's comparable in the case of the Bodhisattva, that he's in spite of what is technically a mistake, you can still learn from it. I guess it's never too late to learn from our mistakes, and that story is a perfect example. Even in your last moments as you're dying, you can still learn from your mistakes.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Trying to remember the name of this disciple. I think it's actually in the Patimokkha rules, which means it's one of the story is in the monastic rules, maybe. Oh, wait. Here we go. I think it's Godika. I think the disciple is Godika, if I'm not mistaken. This sutta here illustrates the story, I think, but it doesn't go into detail. It just refers to Godika and his frustrations. Oh, yes, it does. Yeah. He thought I've fallen away from this temporary freedom of heart no less than 6 times. Why don't I slit my wrists? And yes, it does say. Now at that time, Venerable Godika had already slit his wrists, right? Yeah. And Mara came up to the Buddha and said, "Yeah, see, your disciple failed because he killed himself." And the Buddha said, "No, he He's good. He figured it out. That's right. So yeah, in that case, yeah, it's a violation of the rule, but in spite of it, Godika achieved liberation. So maybe a similar case. That said, try to keep the rules. Don't hurt others or yourself, no matter how frustrated you are. It's probably one of the most, I think, one of the most controversial or like debated stories in the canon. Actually, is this one about Godika. That could certainly be a very I think that might even be a more common problem, I think, than I think we more often fail to have compassion for the issue with violence is we don't have if we're inclined to violence is because we're not experiencing, we're not bringing compassion to bear at that time. And it's sometimes harder to turn compassion toward ourselves than toward others. So it's often more likely that someone will do violence to themselves than to another. And that could be very subtle, or it could be very coarse, like, physically harming yourself. That's one, but also like, mentally disparaging yourself or treating yourself badly or thinking less of yourself. That's also kind of violence, or and it's never called for. It's never appropriate because you wouldn't do it to someone else. You shouldn't do it to yourself either. So I've heard some teachers say that, like normally we start with when we do like loving kindness meditation, we start with ourselves because it's assumed that the being most dear to us is ourself. But a lot of the time, that's not actually true. A lot of the time, we may have negative feelings about ourselves, or we may have negative self-image, or we may think we're not up to the task or whatever, and we might not feel compassion for ourselves. So in this case, you could start backwards. You can do the loving kindness meditation in reverse and start with something that it's impossible not to feel compassion for. So I've heard it recommended that you start with like a puppy or a kitten. Just imagine a puppy or a kitten. There's something innocent, or a baby, something that's innocent and completely harmless and just inspires love and compassion in your heart. That, how could you possibly not feel compassion for this innocent creature? And then you extend that compassion backwards to your friends and family, and then to your enemies, and then to yourself. And that is another way you can do it too, which I think, experiment with that, play with that idea, especially if you're having a hard time generating compassion for your own experience. Has anybody been practicing meditation on a regular basis? I think Ovindu, you said you have like a daily practice with your family that you sit down in the evenings, you do some meditation.
Yeah,
We try everything. We try to do it every day, but some days we miss out.
Yes, some days we're kind of busy, but usually.
But most days.
Yeah, most days. Like at night, we try to do like 15 minutes meditation, and sometimes when I can't sleep, I just try to do meditation because like counting sheep and those stuff don't work.
Counting sheep doesn't work. I recently realized that people mean that one literally. I didn't know that counting sheep was a literal thing that people would do, that they would close their eyes and imagine sheep and go 1, 2, 3 sheep, 4 sheep. Is that actually, have you ever tried that, to literally count sheep?
I tried it when I was younger because I saw in like cartoons and it was so cool, but it never worked. And my teacher asked us like on Monday, how did you use math on the weekend? And a bunch of kids, and then like some kids said their answers, and then the teacher said that he used counting sheep, and I was really impressed because I never knew that you could actually.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I can't imagine things, like I can't make something show up. So I can't count sheep because I don't see them. Like if I close my eyes, I just see my eyelids. Some people have very vivid imaginations. So like I think my dad has a really good one. So if he closes his eyes, he could count the sheep, and he could, I don't know, count their nostrils or whatever, right? But I can't even see white, so forget about counting sheep. It would never work. But so that definitely, I have never really tried counting sheep. But I do try counting my breathing. That works pretty well. Counting breathing is effective for falling asleep, which is.
Counting sheep would also be a meditation because it's concentrating on one thing.
Yeah, that's a perfectly valid kind of meditation. If you want to sit and practice meditation by imagining some arbitrary thing, apples, sheep, flowers, and just count them, that's totally legitimate. That works. It's not in any of the textbooks, but it doesn't matter really. When you're doing your basic kind of concentration meditation, I don't think the theme or the object that you're paying attention to is that important. The traditional manuals, especially in Theravada, are very strict about what the objects are that you're supposed to contemplate. But I think they're not very comprehensive, because if you look at, say, I think one, especially if you get into more meditation, you'll hear a lot about the Visuddhimagga. Put that in here in the chat. I've mentioned it before. There you go. So the Chandima is something you'll hear a lot about if you get more into meditation. And it says there are 40 objects of meditation that the Buddha approved of. But that's not true, because it lists, you're contemplating certain colors, like imagine a colored image, like a colored shape, or contemplate your breathing, or contemplate death, or whatever. But I think it's way too rigid. That this book, I think it's an okay place to start, but it's very rigid, especially because we see very unique kinds of meditation given to people by the Buddha in the early canon. Like there's one case of a guy who just couldn't remember any verses of the Dhamma at all. He couldn't bear it in mind. So the Buddha just gave him an old cloth and said, rub the cloth, and then just say something over and over like, oh, it's pure, it's pure, it's pure, or something. And then as the cloth became dirty, he realized that nothing stays pure forever and became free. And that was it. That's a really unique meditation just for him. And it's not like a specific thing that it's not like in any canonical lists. And there was another one in the Theragatha, which is like the verses of the elder monks, where he just watched like birds. He just watched birds in nature, and he just meditated on the birds, and then he became free. So there's not like a predefined list of themes that are appropriate for contemplating, so long as it is so long as you have all the qualities there. So if you like to count sheep, or imagine a flower, or whatever it is, it's okay, I think. So you can get creative with it. You can play with it a bit. It's like an art more than a science. I think a lot of people try to make it sciencey. It's not really. It's more like art.
I also got a question when you said nature, and I got a question about animals. So I remember we did a lesson that animals are kind of in like niraya, like their own niraya or something like that. So is it possible for an animal to go to Divyaloka or heaven?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's nothing preventing that. So animals. So if you are in the animal realm, it is more likely you'll go down than up. But that's not because of being an animal. That's just a universal rule in samsara. It's more likely that you're going to go down than up. But an animal can go to the higher realms for sure. There's nothing preventing that. It could be that they go because of previous actions they've done in a life. Like they were very good in the past. Maybe they were a great king and they were generous, or they were like a doctor and they helped people, or whatever. So that could propel them, after doing something bad, they spend some time as an animal, and then they go on to experience the benefits. Or it could be that they're an extraordinarily well-behaved animal. I think that's kind of unusual, though. It's generally understood that animals are kind of bad at understanding morality. So it's very hard, not impossible, but it's very hard for an animal kind of cultivate on purpose an attitude that will propel them toward the higher realms. But I mean, maybe there's always exceptions.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I think there's at least one Jataka tale. Yeah, there's lots of Jataka tales where the Bodhisattva appears as an animal and makes wise moral decisions. So there's, in theory, you could do that. I don't know if I've heard of any specific instances of animals, animal rebirth. I think all the cases I've heard of like rebirth stories, because there are a lot of stories of people who like, especially in their childhood, claim to remember previous lives. And sometimes, occasionally, there's like enough information there that they can kind of corroborate it a bit. Like they can go, oh, well, like people might be born in one village and say, I know if you go to another village, and it's like a child, they'll say, if you go to the other village, there's like a White House, and in the White House is a woman named blah, blah, blah. And if you look in her chest of drawers, there's my old dentures or whatever, and they will be there. So there are some stories like that. I think there's probably not enough evidence to make that conclusive. It's just anecdotal stuff. But I've never heard of one where the person was an animal. I've never heard of that before. So I don't know. I don't know why that might be. It could be because the stories aren't real and people can't, we're more likely to imagine, if we're going to imagine who we were in the past, we're more likely to imagine something similar to what we are now and less likely to imagine something different. So maybe it's just because they're not real, or maybe there's some other reason. I don't know. Maybe it's just hard to corroborate. If you remember being an animal, it's hard to like prove which animal you were, because we don't keep close track of animals like we do with people. So I don't know.
Mike, I have a question. Is killing jellyfish bad because jellyfish don't have brains?
So this is a good question. I think there are two main points I would make. One is that it's important to understand that Buddhism does not equate consciousness with the brain. So a sentient being is like a stack, right? Like you have to have a body, and then you have feelings, and you have all the aggregates up to consciousness. And you have to have all those assembled pieces in order for us to consider it to be a sentient being. If it is a sentient being, having all those things up to and including consciousness, then you have moral obligations to it. If it doesn't, you don't. So you do not have, there are no moral repercussions for like smashing a table with a baseball bat. Not necessarily, unless it's not your table. Then maybe. But it's not like we look at a being and say it has a brain, therefore it's conscious. Some humans have a brain but are in a vegetative state, and we don't say they're conscious. We have this weird understanding of what we owe to them. And some people say, well, you can just pull the plug on them. It doesn't matter. They're dead anyway. And this is a debated question. The question of where consciousness comes from, as far as I understand it, is not answered yet by science and like physics. We don't understand what causes consciousness. And this is a really interesting question. I encourage you to think about it and research it and read about it. So this doesn't say that it can't be explained by physics, but it just hasn't been yet. So we don't really know what's conscious because we don't know what causes consciousness. And because of that, we can't say for sure that jellyfish are not conscious. And so I would play on the safe side. That's me. I would err on the safe side. I would try to be cautious. And just say, oh, well, it could be conscious, so I'll treat it with respect and not harm it. The same could be said of plants as well, and like trees and all these things. We don't really know if they're conscious or not. And monks have some rules actually about not harming them. Just I think to be on the safe side. Yeah, and I think that's the second point I wanted to make, is that generally speaking, even like you can play on the safe side by saying, I don't know if this thing is a sentient being or not. It's in a weird liminal space. so I'll treat it with respect and loving compassion anyway. And I think that's almost more important, because that's the attitude you want to cultivate, is love, compassion, respect for even everything. Like, even if it's not a sentient being, like, radiate that love and compassion, respect anyway. And I think that is a very safe uh, strategy. That's a safe attitude to have, so that even if you don't know if you're dealing with a sentient being or not, if you carry that attitude with you, I don't think you can go too wrong.
Mhm. But like, so I know this is a weird question, but so we don't know if bacteria is unconscious or not. So, and the Buddha says that we should always be clean. So how do we treat bacteria with love and kindness?
That's a good question. I think in the case of bacteria, it might be, I think you're probably safe, because this question actually was around at the time of the Buddha. The Jains themselves theorized, and I mean, I don't think they didn't know that microorganisms existed. They just happened to be right. Uh, but basically, there were people, including Jains, who believed in microscopic organisms and wanted to avoid harming them for exactly this reason. And so they would take quite extreme measures, like they would cover their mouth. They would always wear masks. They would always wear face masks, so that they wouldn't inhale these creatures and kill them. And they would sweep the ground before them so that they would not step on any microscopic or very small creatures, uh, and so on. And they would, yeah, sometimes they would even go to very, very extreme things, like they would just not eat anything and just die, because they're like, it's safer for me to just starve myself to death than to accidentally eat something or hurt something that is alive, right? Uh, and the Buddha rejected extreme asceticism like this, because it was, I think, impractical. The key issue there being, I think, intentionality. Like, if you're not, when you're washing yourself, you're not really seeking to harm microscopic organisms. It's about just maintaining cleanliness. You don't really have a particular attitude toward them. And also, I think that just with weight of authority, the fact that, the Buddha and the Arhats would say, like, eat food, and they would wash themselves, that demonstrates that there probably isn't too much moral harm in engaging these activities. But
So
it's a
it's
good
okay
question.
it's okay to like kill bacteria and stuff.
I think so, because I think the idea being that if we look at the examples of beings who are awakened, they don't consider these organisms when it comes to morality. So probably they are not moral agents, because not all organisms are, like certain plants and things are not considered moral, or fungus is not, like, we don't have a moral responsibility toward it. So probably bacteria falls in the same category. It would be extremely impractical to try and live life without harming any bacteria ever. I don't think you could realistically do that. You can, so yeah, I would say that don't worry about it too much on that front, because I don't think very many people have. And yeah, with regard to, say, things like jellyfish, there isn't a hard and fast rule or answer to this. Nobody has made and found a way to classify every single organism and say, these ones are sentient, these ones are not. These ones are sentient beings and they deserve our moral respect, and these don't matter. There isn't an easy way to answer that question, because, as I said, we don't know what causes consciousness, so we can't answer that question scientifically. And the only way you could know is become, like, be a Buddha and, like, know the answer to all these questions by, like, having phenomenal insight into reality. But in the absence of that, we can follow the example of the Buddha and other enlightened beings and take our best guess, and just, when in doubt, just be compassionate. And I think that's your best course of action. In my case, I like jellyfish. I think they're adorable, and I never hurt them because I just think they're so cute. I really do. I don't know, but that's just me. But yeah, I leave it up to you to decide for yourselves.
Mike, I
Thank
think
you.
what Ovi said in the form of it is okay to kill. I feel like it's the attitude, right?
Yeah. The attitude.
Attitude. You maintain your safety, and not that it's okay to kill. The killing consciousness is the problem, I think.
Yeah.
You
It's
know?
when you have a sentient being with all the
Yeah.
aggregates in place that the
If
issue
you wash
becomes
the
a
hand
problem.
just to kill bacteria, I think that's kind of a thing, I guess. But if you
Mhm.
maintain your safety, cleanliness, uh, personal hygiene is okay, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's just the attitude, because I think what you call Chetana is more effective than the action. The Jains took the action, actually.
Yeah. That's the like, yeah, James took the word action, kamma, literally. They mean it's what you do, but the Buddha said that it's your intention that is your action. We don't call it an action unless it is intended. Like if you fall down the stairs, I wouldn't say that you have a moral responsibility for that, right? You it's an accident. So in the case of, say, uh, bacteria, and you're washing yourself, if you accidentally kill some bacteria, that's not a moral failing. And then the other dimension is perhaps bacteria don't have the five aggregates, in which case they're not. It doesn't matter ethically how you behave regarding them. But we can't tell for sure what organisms have the five aggregates and not. It becomes difficult to tell the less similar from us you get. Like, technically, you don't really know that any being has the five aggregates except you. You know you have them because you experience your body, you experience sensations all the way up to consciousness. Consciously, you know that you're knowing, and you have all. That's how you have the five aggregates. But you don't actually know it even for other people. You just kind of guess because they're similar to you. You're similar to me, you behave similarly, so I assume that your internal universe is the same. So the less similar to yourself you get, the harder it is to tell if it's got all five. And so you do have at some point to take your best guess and just have the right attitude. And I think that's the safest.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
On a different level, we have taken some, practices of Jains. Some Buddhists always take turns to Jain practices sometimes. Take the action part more than the mental part, I think.
It's true. It's certainly, there are some people who take the literal word of the rules very seriously and tiptoe around all the specific and don't worry about the intention. That's not right.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Okay. Well, in that case, I think we've had a good lesson today. Cool discussion with some good questions. And I will see you all again in a couple of weeks before we close the session. It will be it's the 14th, so the 28th of March. We'll all get together again and talk a little bit more about Devas.
Okay. The stanza, Chattamana stanza. In few more weeks, we're gonna chant the stanzas in what do you call, in Ovini's voice.
Oh yeah, I look forward to hearing that.
Okay. Okay, so we're gonna be meeting again on March 28th.
Yep, that's right. And in the meantime, I guess if you have time to brainstorm or think about your creative projects, I encourage you to do so. Otherwise, just maintain whatever level of practice you've been able to do, and treat everyone and everything with compassion.
That's a very good suggestion.
Thank you, Hamduni.
Thank you, Hamdu. Thank you, Mike, for this Saturday.
Thank you, Hamduni.